Count them off. 1, 2, 3, 4 wins in a row. The Mets just completed their first sweep of the season. Let's talk about it on this edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. For the first time this season, the Mets have completed a sweep. They welcome their home crowd to Citi Field with 3 awesome games and really just incredible pitching throughout this weekend. I wanted to come on, do a live stream after the game today because I just have so much to talk about. First, about this series, which we're going to go through on the show here. And then for tomorrow's show, I really want to look at where this team's at now 3 series into the season, particularly look at this offense, because I think the top of the lineup is showing what they can do. You are seeing good quality at bats, really 1 through 4, 1 through 5 in the lineup. But once you get to the back half of this lineup, particularly that Mark Vientos, Brett Baty, and then sometimes Jose Siri or Tyrone Taylor section of the lineup, you're not getting a lot of production. The Mets are getting more production from the catching position where you don't typically expect that offense to come than you're getting from guys like Mark Vientos you expected from, or a Brett Baty who had a great spring, hoping you might get some power from Jose Siri. It's just not happening. You do have to credit the Toronto Blue Jays because they had great pitching the whole series long, but the Mets just had better pitching. And that's why they're able to win all 3 games. They score 5 runs in the first game, and then the offense goes pretty quiet, and yet they're still able to find their way, one with the comeback on Saturday night, and then Sunday just you score 2 runs relatively early, and you ride that the whole game. Incredible pitching by the New York Mets. The offensive side of things, again, there wasn't much to speak of. Bowden Francis followed up, again, good start by Kevin Gausman to open up the series where he was over 30 pitches in the first inning. You thought the Mets were going to get into that bad Toronto bullpen maybe before the 5th, and then he somehow is still pitching in the 6th inning. Chris Bassett was the best starter in this series for the Blue Jays. Really had the Mets locked down until, of course, they got into that bullpen, came back and walked it off. And then again today, Bowden Francis, anytime the Mets had a threat, he seemed to calm it down. First inning, Francisco Lindor leads things off with a base hit. You got Juan Soto coming up, and it's incredible how good you feel now. When Lindor does something to start the game, you're already on the edge of your seat because you're expecting a run to get on the board between Juan Soto, Pete Alonso, Brandon Nimmo. This lineup is just set up so well at the top. But in the first inning, Bowden Francis got Juan Soto to hit into a double play ball, sort of ending that threat before it started. Worked around a 1-out single given to Mark Vientos in the second inning because, again, that Baty, Jose Siri part of the lineup was really rough today. Both of them struck out to end that threat. Bottom of the 3rd inning was the one real struggle inning for Bowden Francis, and it starts by walking the 9-hole batter Hayden Sanger, who had a really nice game, walking a base hit, not bad for Sanger. Francisco Lindor struck out Juan Soto. Bowden Francis wanted nothing to do with him, so he walked Soto. And then Pete Alonso, once again, is the guy that comes through, with the big hit, really the one big hit of the game, able to drive in a run and also set up a sac fly opportunity for Brandon Nimmo, and Nimmo got the job done. And those were your 2 runs. That was it for the offense. Jesse Winker gets out to end that 3rd inning. Francis retires the side in order in the 4th and the 5th. He erased that Hayden Sanger base hit with the double play in that 5th inning. 6th inning, Pete Alonso, Brandon Nimmo, they each get knocks. Jesse Winker was Bowden Francis's last batter that he faced. He struck him out. Chad Green comes on. Mark Vientos draws a walk to load the bases. And again, here comes Brett Baty. Making me look bad, Brett, because I believed that spring training was real. And as I talked about then, and as I've continued to say now, you still didn't know until he got into the season. And now it's blatantly clear. And again, I want to talk about this more on tomorrow's show. It's part of why I'm recording right now, because I want to spend a whole show really focusing in on, who's going to grab second base. Are the Mets just waiting for Jeff McNeil and they clear Baty and then Acuna is just there to be a bench piece while McNeil then gets all the run? What are they going to do in center field? These are the questions I want to ask tomorrow. But because here you have an opportunity, bases loaded, and Brett Baty just has a horrible at bat and strikes out, and then Jose Siri flies out, and you end that threat. And that was really their last really big chance to make this a little more of a comfortable victory. Juan Soto has a hustle double in the 7th inning, but that came with 2 outs. Pete Alonso hits the ball hard, but it goes right into the outfielder's mitt to leave Soto stranded. And then, ultimately from that point on, the Mets just did nothing. So it really came down to the pitching in this one. And again, tomorrow's show is really going to be focused on what do the Mets do to figure out something so it's not just 1 through 5. You have a chance, 4 times through every time through the order, but once you get to that middle to bottom, it's a real drop off. I mean, the Mets are getting more production from their 9-hole hitter when it's Hayden Sanger than 6 through 8. So, and today 5 through 8 because Jesse Winker didn't have a good game. But again, this is not a downer Mets podcast because ultimately, despite the fact that they have been held to 3 runs or less in 6 of their first 9 games, despite the fact that they've been held to less than 3 runs in 4 of those games, they still have found a way to start this season 6-3, and they've won 4 games in a row. And that is due to this pitching, which continues to be exceptional. David Peterson, if he didn't get a little bit banged up there in the 5th inning, I feel like he was going to go 6. He looked so strong early on, 1, 2, 3 first inning, worked around a single and a walk in the 2nd inning, got a big strikeout when he needed it, ground ball to get out of that jam. Again, works around a single and a walk in the 3rd inning, gets Andres Jimenez to strike out to escape that one. 4th inning, issued his 3rd walk of the day with 1 out, but then immediately gets an inning-ending double play. So you're seeing with David Peterson, even when he's not completely right, he has that ability to eventually work in the zone and get that big out when he needs it. And when he really needs the strikeout, he still has the ability between, the slider, sometimes elevated fastballs, still has that ability to get the big strikeout in those spots where that's the one thing you need. So I thought David Peterson looked good until, unfortunately, he didn't, because 5th inning, gives up a leadoff double, gets a strikeout, gets a ground out, about to escape, and then he has, I don't know if it was a back spasm, I don't know what exactly happened. I'm actually going to rely on those of you watching live for our final segment today. Please let me know if you see any updates on what happened with David Peterson, if this is something they're concerned about or not, because to lose David Peterson, that's going to be a big blow to this rotation. But again, we'll kind of talk about that layer of it to close out the show. Ultimately, he walks 2 and then he hits a batter to force a run before Carlos Mendoza had seen enough. They probably should have pulled him when they first noticed some discomfort, but you didn't have anybody up and ready. So Kranick is getting ready as quick as he can, but this is not a guy that has a long track record as a reliever. He was converted to be a reliever midway through last season. So he's still a little bit new at this. I was even surprised that he was going to pitch after throwing 30 pitches, on Friday. So only 1 day's rest. He goes right back out there and still gets 4 outs. So Kranick is able to come in cold, and the velocity wasn't there at the beginning of the outing because he probably was a little bit cold, but he's able to get a pop-up to get out of that threat. Then it's a 1, 2, 3, 6 with the strikeout. Reed Garrett comes on, 1, 2, 3, 7th with the strikeout. AJ Minter comes on, gives up a base hit, but I thought he looked as good as he has all season. The ball was coming out of his hand great. Picks up a couple strikeouts, puts up a 0. The only guy where it got a little bit dicey is Edwin Diaz in the 9th. Hit the leadoff man, got a strikeout, got a fly out, but then he hits Bo Bichette to put a couple runners on for Vladdy, and he quickly gets a ground out to end the game. So the biggest takeaway, I think, through the first 9 games of this season is that this Mets bullpen is looking elite, and that's what I want to talk about next, how they have just found this group that could really be the backbone of this team, the real driving force for this to be one of the better teams in the National League. Because when you have a bullpen this good, for one, it can sort of help a rotation that might not get as much length this year as it did last year. But also, when your lineup goes cold, all it has to do is get an early lead, and that starter has to hand you the ball at the lead, and then you can see a Mets bullpen come in the 5th inning of this game, 2-1 ball game, bases loaded, and they put up nothing but zeros for the Mets to complete their first sweep of the season. I want to talk about the bullpen a little bit more in just a minute. First, though, a quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. March Madness is almost over, but FanDuel is giving you a chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything, from buzzer beaters to who's going to win between Florida and Houston. Also, you got, of course, the MLB season in full swing. You got the NBA playoffs just around the corner. FanDuel will help you stay in the action with everything going on. The app is simple to use. And when I win, I get paid instantly. There's no waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com to get in on the college hoops, NBA action, MLB season. All of it is there waiting for you. FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 13,000 subscribers. And I will be taking some questions in the final segment today. And if someone can let me know on David Peterson, if you guys have seen anything, I do appreciate that. So let's talk about this bullpen, because they've been unbelievable this season. I mean, it has been remarkable to watch, because as I talked about a little bit on the show that was released this morning, last year, it never felt like there was defined roles in that bullpen. Edwin Diaz was your closer. At times Reed Garrett was the clear setup man, but he could come in at any inning, and he was one guy you trust. And there was a point in the season where you trusted Daniel Nunez or Jose Budo, and at a point early in the season, Adam Ottavino was the setup guy, but that didn't always go well. But there just never felt like a time where the Mets bullpen had clear-cut defined roles where everyone was thriving in them. And that is what the Mets have gotten to very early in this season, where it feels like Carlos Mendoza knows what he has in this bullpen now better than he did at any point of a season last year, where the Mets ended up going to Game 6 of the NLCS, but it was in spite of their bullpen. I mean, they found a combination that worked in the playoffs. Part of that was getting someone like David Peterson to help out that bullpen. But, Ryan Stanek worked for the Mets. I should also mention, during the season, Phil Maton was great for the Mets, but they just never quite had the type of bullpen that could go up against a team like the Dodgers, like the Padres. Well, now it's super early. These things are going to evolve, but it's looking like a bullpen that can go up against any team in baseball, where all you're asking your starting pitcher is, keep the game close through 5. And if you can keep the game close through 5, or even just into the 5th inning, you have guys that can come in, get you out of that jam that the starting pitcher leaves, and then continue on, get another inning, and you have so many weapons to go to. I was really impressed to see Max Kranick go out there on just 1 day's rest and get 4 outs. That was a really strong effort by him. We talked about him all spring. He was racking up strikeouts. He was doing his thing. Now it's just pitch to contact, man. 4 games now, 7 innings pitched, no runs, 3 strikeouts. His whip is 0.14. That is walks and hits over innings pitched. That's because so far through 7 innings, if this was a start for Max Kranick, he's allowed 1 hit and no walks this season. 1 hit, no walks. That's just straight up, I'm going to pound the strike zone. He's gone through 7 innings and only 71 pitches. So that just shows you the effectiveness of Max Kranick, where he's got a fastball that can play in the zone, where guys are struggling to do much with it, and so attack the zone with that pitch. I talked about that with Huascar Brazaban on yesterday's show. Same thing. He's got a heavy ball. He throws a good sinker, changeup, cutter, 4-seam, and everything in the zone. He's at 7 in a 3rd innings pitch without allowing a run, 3 hits and 1 walk allowed by Brazaban. You have Reed Garrett, who just had his 4th appearance today. He's only thrown 4 innings because he's not the multi-inning guy. He's the guy that puts out the fires. But how many runners has Reed Garrett stranded this year? He always seems to come in these big spots, get the big strikeout when he needs to, strand the runners. He's been exceptional. And the thing is, this bullpen can still get better because AJ Minter is still rounding into form. With that said, He's gone through 3 2/3 innings up to this point through 4 appearances, 7 strikeouts. So you're still seeing the swing and miss stuff. And again, I thought today AJ Minter looked as good as he has all season. You were really seeing him just letting that fastball go up in the zone. And it felt like, maybe the first time this year where he just really was carrying himself with a lot of swagger on the mound. Like he knew he had it today and he wasn't going to give up any runs. So, so far the numbers don't look as good for Minter because he did give up a pair, but it's 4 appearances. And again, we've seen the capability, and this is a guy that has been as effective pitching in the National League East out of the bullpen as any reliever in this division for a long, long time. 3.30 career ERA, with the Braves primarily here. It's a huge piece, and I think it does give you a legitimate 8th inning guy or a 7th inning guy when they want to go that way that they didn't have last year. They didn't have, yes, they had Daniel Nunez, they had Garrett, they had guys, Phil Maton was probably the best version of it, but they didn't have a guy as good as AJ Minter has been in that role, who's been a veteran, who has the experience and the track record. And so when you have Reed Garrett that can put out a fire early, you have Brazaban and Kranick who can put out a fire if they need to and give you length after that. You hope Jose Budo gets to that same point, and his numbers aren't bad so far. I don't think he's thrown the ball as well as Brazaban or Kranick, but 3 games, 5 1/3 innings pitched, only 1 earned run. He did give up, a run that was inherited in his last outing on Saturday, but still, I mean, overall, it's been solid. 1.69 ERA. Danny Young has been the one sore spot in this bullpen, but they haven't gone to him much. And then Ryan Stanek has only gotten 2 appearances so far, so that's another high octane arm that they haven't really tapped into. I think Edwin Diaz, has looked not quite as dominant as he can be. And yet he hasn't given up any runs, and he's gotten the job done on, now was it 2 saves so far this season? But overall, it is 2 saves. I just think that this bullpen is already, to start the year, better than the bullpen ever was last year. And there's still Daniel Nunez waiting in the wings to come in and make an impact. And I feel better about the other arms that are in that depth in the minor leagues, just because David Stearns has had to have more time to collect arms that he likes. We have yet to see Tyler Zuber, if I'm not mistaken, pitch in the big leagues since the Mets traded for him at the deadline. But this is a guy that has a really good sweeper that the Mets identified, that had control and had optionality, that they picked up in a trade with the Rays, that at some point this season is probably going to come up and make some level of an impact. So I just think that this bullpen right now is in as good of a place as we can be, or as the Mets can be. I hate doing that, man. I'm sitting here looking at comments trying to see if I was talking about David Peterson, and I don't know why I saw someone put something that it threw me off here. Regardless, this bullpen's as good as it's been for the Mets in some time, and what I want to talk about next here is, does that bullpen have to step up even more if you lose David Peterson? I'm going to take a quick break here to try to do a little research and see if there's been any news there. But first, a quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is also brought to you by Game Time. There's nothing better than catching an MLB game live. The crack of the bat, the roar of the crowd, the smell of ballpark food, and Citi Field's open now. You want to go out there, check out Mets versus Marlins this week. Game Time is going to make it easier to get tickets than it's ever been before, with last-minute deals, all-in pricing, and the lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the stress out of buying MLB tickets, plus the ticket prices drop as game time gets closer, meaning you can score an incredible deal. When I went on Monday this past week, it wasn't until I had already parked the car and I was walking into Marlins Park that I finally pulled open the Game Time app and found the tickets, and it took me a minute. I got a great deal, and I was in the ballpark just like that. They're delivered right to your phone. It could not be easier. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Down the Game Time app. Create an account. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account. Redeem the code LOCKEDONMLB. That's LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets. Lowest price guaranteed. All right, so now we're going to look real quick, see if there is any update on David Peterson. I have not seen anything yet. We'll see if that was a back thing. Was it an oblique? I mean, I hope not. But if here's the issue that we can just say on the front end. I don't know who the depth starter is right now. I really don't. Okay, I'm now looking right now. Carlos Mendoza says that David Peterson is physically fine. He was not dealt with an injury on the mound, which is why he stayed in as long as he did. He was experiencing nausea and blurred vision. He felt like he got punched in the stomach. Well, there you go. Okay. So now we got the update. David Peterson is okay. That's huge because I would have had some nausea and blurred vision, and it would have been a real gut punch if David Peterson wasn't in this rotation and had to spend any time on the IL because, as I talked about a little bit on the show this morning, I don't think the Mets have an option right now. Like I think they would have to seriously consider going outside the organization if they needed a starting pitcher at this moment. I mean, they'd push back on that. They'd say, oh, we got Justin Hagenman or Brandon Waddle. But I'll tell you what, the fact is, Brandon Sproat and Blade Tidwell are the guys that you would hope would be the next guys up to be called on to help this rotation, is because it's top prospects with really good stuff. Those two guys are throwing 60 pitches once a week right now. So they haven't got up. I think Tidwell did throw 70 in his first start. So we'll say 60 to 70 pitches. They have yet to be stretched out to 85, 90 pitches. So I just don't foresee the Mets calling on either of those guys right now. So this is why you're really hoping that this rotation can continue as is, because there isn't an option until Paul Blackburn comes back. Now, I think once Paul Blackburn is back, then you have some depth, because while you need a six-man rotation with Kodai Senga, I think this bullpen is good enough where the Mets could navigate some bullpen days if they need to. You can try to stay away from a Max Kranick or a Jose Budo, knowing you have a bullpen day coming up, and then you can let one of those guys go for maybe 3 innings to start the game, and maybe you can get 2 of those guys that you can cobble together and just make it work. But bullpen games do put strain on your team prior to the bullpen game and after it, so you want to stay away from it. I think the Mets can do it, though, because I remember I did the math on this not too long ago. If the Mets had to stick with a 5-man rotation, I believe there was like 3 starts that you would need a 6 starter for. Now, when Blackburn comes back, and that's assuming his knee heals up and he's fine, you're going to be able to just roll with the 6-man rotation. You'll pitch a man down in the bullpen. Likely you'd see Danny Young get DFA'd if everything held at serve as we've seen so far. Blackburn would be eligible. He would make the start on April 18th. And that would be when you would get rid of a Danny Young, and then you would roll with 6 starters, and that would be a 6-man rotation for the rest of the year, theoretically, until Sean Manaea and Frankie Montas might replace one of your starters. But it does seem like the Mets will eventually get to a 6-man rotation, and you would hope the bullpen stays healthy all year. But like, you're seeing the 7 guys that right now could be the 7-man bullpen minus Danny Young, and you'd feel very good about the Mets staff overall. And the hope would be with 6 starters, maybe you'd start to get potentially a little more length out of some of those guys as you got deeper into the season. But right now, it's 5 guys. It's not anything behind them until Blackburn's ready. And if one of them goes down, you're in a lot of trouble. So it's good to know that David Peterson is feeling good. If the Mets can just get to April 18th, then again, you'll have 6 starters. And if you ever had to drop down to a 5-man rotation, you would have the ability to go to some bullpen games here and there. If you wanted to, you could always grab a spot starter up, at some point if you needed one. Like I said, though, until we see Brandon Sproat and Blade Tidwell both thriving and getting that pitch count up a little bit, I just don't know what is left behind what the Mets currently have with their rotation depth. But hopefully it's not going to matter, because these 5 guys they have will keep on rolling. You have another off day this week on Thursday, so you don't have to worry about that 6 starter spot again until April 18th. So you see Kodai Senga take on the Marlins again tomorrow. And then what is it then? Tyler McGill and No, it would be Clay Holmes, Tyler McGill, and then it turns over to Canning. So that's where this rotation is at here. I like that this yeah, just a little brain tumor. Jeez. Interesting comments, to say the least. But anyway, that's where the Mets are at here. You know, you are looking at a team that has now won 4 games in a row. They have a great bullpen, a lineup that is due to break out even further. And I'll be previewing that series coming up on tomorrow's show. Same thing as always. I do have this question. There's 2 Locked On Mets. For those of you who are a little confused because there was 2 streams going on, I'm not sure if Chris has wrapped his up, but there are postcasts now, and they're still Locked On Mets. The Locked On Mets postcast is hosted by Chris Schubert. He's doing every single game. After the game, he is going live on YouTube. For the games that he's not available, I'll do a stream like I did today. Today, he was available, but I just had so much that I wanted to talk about, recapping this game and this series. And then tomorrow, like I said, I have a lot I want to get into because I really want to dive into Brett Baty's struggles, Mark Vientos' struggles, Luis Angel Acuna's struggles, the lack of production from the center field position. What are the Mets going to do with these spots in the lineup? Is there an answer? When are they going to find that answer? I want to really go into that. And then, of course, again, I'll be previewing Mets versus Marlins as this team looks to continue a 4-game winning streak. As always, thank you all for tuning in. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. If you are watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. If you want to follow me on social media, you can do so at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or your first watch every day. Now, for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports, talking about Locked On Sports Today with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.